Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, The Freelance Life. If this is your first time stopping by, welcome. And for those of you who are returning, welcome back. I'm Jen, and I'm a freelance graphic designer, illustrator, and educator based out of the Midwest, and I run Bella and Sophia Creative Studio. On this channel, you will find in-depth creative tutorials relating to design, creative business, and illustration. I also share a behind-the-scenes view of the work that I do as a creative freelancer and educator. Today, I'm sharing my top 10 tips for when you're working in Affinity Photo. A couple of weeks ago, I shared my top 10 Affinity Designer tips, and I'll include a link to the video in the cards above and in the description box below. This week, I wanted to share a rundown of some of my most helpful tips in the Affinity Photo software that I feel make creating with the software so much easier. As you all know, I'm a huge fan of the Affinity products, and I think they're a strong and affordable competitor in the design market, and I think all designers should be aware of the brand. I hope you find this list helpful. Let's get started. Alright, so let's jump into the program. We're going to launch Affinity Photo, and before we get into the tips, what I want to do is just take you through the basic setup. So in the upper menu, you will see like your file setup, edit, document menus, things like that. On the left-hand side will be your toolbar, and on the right-hand side will be your studios. We'll get into more of those as we move through the tutorial. So first, let's set up a new file. We're going to go into File, and we're going to select New, and we are just going to set up a basic 8.5 by 11 artboard. So what we can do is go into our layout setup here on the right-hand side. What I'm going to do is change my document units from millimeters to inches, just so that it's a little easier for me to kind of like keep in mind and gauge what the size would be in real life. I'm going to change my page width to 8.5 and my page height to 11. I'm going to keep my DPI at 300. And I'm going to keep my color format RGB because we're going to be working on screen, but depending on your needs, you're able to change your color format from RGB to CMYK. And I'm going to check mark transparent background just so that I can have transparency, because depending on the kind of files that I work with, so say for example, I'm making stickers, I'll often need a PNG with a transparent background so that I can cut around the illustrated elements of my document to make it easier when I'm working with something like the silhouette or a cricket. And then you can also include margins depending on what you're working on. If you need any kind of like printer lines or things like that, you can do that here. And then there's also a whole bunch of like presets with print sizes, press ready, photo sizes, devices, things like that. And then let's just hit create. Now before we begin playing around with things, I want to just highlight a few things within our menus. So on the left hand side are all of our tools, and on the top is your document menu bar. You'll have things like your file menu and edit menu, so you can copy and paste. Your document menu, which allows you to resize your document in your canvas and flip things around. Your layers menu, which includes all of the different layer functions that you might need to use, like layer masks, adjustment layers, filter layers, things like that. Your selection menu, your arrange menu, which you can utilize to align elements together. Your filter menu, which we'll go through a little bit more in detail. You can adjust your view. You can zoom in, zoom out, rotate left or right. You can turn on any type of snapping or add guides and grids and things like that if you need them. And then your view, which will allow you to adjust the different studios that you have on your right hand side, which will allow you to add things to your studio. So say for example, your studio does not look like mine. You don't have your character studio or color studio. You can turn those on here by check marking them. So the first tip I want to highlight is working in personas. So with Affinity, there's different kinds of personas that you can work with. So if you're in Affinity Designer, like my last video, you're able to work in Affinity Photo persona and an export persona. And then in Affinity Photo, you have your photo persona where you can just do all the main things that you would do with a raster-based type of software, like use your brushes and things like that, or edit photos. But you can also go into different types of persona, like your liquify persona, your develop persona, which is focused on photos, especially if you're working with raw images. And then we also have the export persona, which is similar to what we worked with in Affinity Designer. So I'm just going to add some things to my screen really quickly so that we can kind of play around with this. So I'm going to select a shape from my shape tool here on the left-hand side. All the way towards the bottom are your shape tools. You have a ton of different tools to select from. I'm going to select this heart, and then I'm just going to make a heart on my screen. If you hold shift, it'll adjust based on proportions. And then once I've created that heart, I'm going to select this black arrow tool, and then I'm going to go on the right hand side and select my color studio. And then I'm going to update the color by adjusting my RGB sliders here. And I'm just going to make a couple of these. So say for example, you're making stickers and you were making digital stickers. So the kind of stickers that you aren't going to print out, but that you'll use in something like GoodNotes digitally for digital planning. So oftentimes you'll create multiple stickers. You'll want to export each of these individually. So you could select each element in your artboard and select File, Export, and just select that selection area from your dropdown. And in this case, you'd want it to be a PNG so you don't have a white background. And that's why I created it with transparency so that you'll have a transparent background. And then you could hit Export and then save it. Obviously, we want to do things quickly. So what I like to do is utilize my export persona. And what this allows me to do is select once I click on my export persona, it says 3 dots, I can select my black arrow tool to select all of the elements on my board, and you'll know they're all selected because they'll be outlined in blue. And then you will see that these are each on their own individual layers. What you will then do is you'll want to right click and select Create Slice. And then if you look on your right hand side here, right next to where your layers menu is, if you click on slices, all of the elements that you sliced out of that image will be there individually. And what we can do is export all of these all at the same time. So what we'd want to do is just select the ones that we're going to be exporting and uncheck anything that we don't want. So for example, the background, you could choose to export the full sheet of these stickers. Some people like that. Or you can just export all of these at once as individual PNG files. You'll see these export options at the top. You can adjust your presets. I'm going to select PNG dithered because that way I have that nice high quality and I have a transparent background. I'm going to select all of these, and then you'll know that all of the correct elements are selected because it'll show how many slices you're exporting, which in this case is the 8 hearts. Then you'll want to click Export Slices. And then you're just going to save them, hit export. And now what you'll find is if you go into that file, all of those images are there individually as their own PNG file, and you didn't have to export each of them one by one. This just makes things so much quicker when you're working with these types of files. Now I'm going to go back into my photo persona. And the next thing I want to do is look at our pen tool. So I'm going to get rid of these hearts here. And then I'm going to go back into my shape tool and I'm going to select a rectangle. I'm just going to create a rectangle over my artboard just so that it's easier to see. And I'm going to update the color to white. And then I'm going to lock that layer. That way nothing moves. So by clicking on that little lock icon, I'll lock my layer. And then I'm going to go on the left-hand side and I'm going to select my pen tool. So just because you're working in a raster program with Affinity doesn't mean you don't have access to vector tools. And in this case, you have access to the pen tool, which will allow you to create vector-based graphics in photo. And what's nice is that the pen tool just gives you a lot of opportunity to create really clean line work, and it utilizes points to create these Bezier curves and shapes. So just create line segments with points. So I'm going to click on one side of my artboard, hold shift to create a straight line, and then click on the other end. and I'm going to increase the size of this just so that it's a little easier to see. So I've created a straight line with these 2 points, and then I'm going to create a curved line. So the easiest way to do that is to select a point on your screen, hold shift. So before you let go of your mouse, what you'll want to do is drag outwards and it'll create the curve for you. So this allows you to create really nice, clean curves. The best tip I can give when it comes to creating Bezier curves and curves in general with the pen tool is the least number of points, the better. So now that we talked about kind of like elements that are used for artwork, I'm going to touch on the brushes really quickly. Affinity Photo has some fantastic brush tools. There's a wide variety and a wide array of different brushes and brush tips to choose from, including some really pretty like textured watercolor, as well as like traditional inspired paint brushes, grunge brushes, and things like that. So let's go down on our left-hand side in our toolbar and select the brush tool. If we hold down, you'll see that there's 3 options. There's the paintbrush tool, color replacement brush tool, and your pixel tool. We're just going to select our paintbrush tool to start with. And on the right-hand side here, you should have access to your brush studio. If you don't have access to it, just go into your view and then scroll down to studio and then select your brushes and make sure there's a check mark by them. And then once you open that studio up, you'll be able to click on the drop down menu and you'll see that there is a ton of different options. You have acrylic brushes, artist brushes, basic brushes. So I'm just going to show you some of the more textured dry media kind of brushes just so that it's easy to see. Let's go into our color options here and I'm going to select something bright that is easy to see on screen, this pink. And what we can do is resize our brush if we need to. You could utilize the open bracket or close bracket on your keyboard to increase the size of your brush. Or you can just go into the upper left-hand side in that little main menu at the very top here, and you'll see you'll be able to adjust the width by clicking on that little drop-down. By just dragging left to decrease or dragging right to increase. You can adjust the opacity here as well. I like to use these when I'm trying to add texture to artwork, but there's also a really fast way you can go about filling color within artwork, depending on if it's a shape, a closed shape, or a line work shape, things like that. What you can use is the paint bucket tool. So what I like to do is, I'll say for example, I'm going to create a rectangle shape with just the stroke, and I wanted to fill this in. Obviously I could utilize the fill, but what you can also do is go to the left hand side, select your paint bucket tool. Just want to make sure we have a fill color. I'm going to change it just so that you can see what this looks like, and then we can tap inside of our shape and it will fill it. Keep in mind though that it does tend to kind of give you a white outline, so you may want to adjust your tolerance in the upper left hand corner. And if you're having trouble filling, what you'll want to do is just select contiguous and then you can select current layer. The next tip I want to highlight is utilizing the Affine filter for pattern making. I am a graphic designer and illustrator. Part of the work that I do is surface pattern design, and using Affinity Photo for pattern design is fantastic. Affine is a really fast function that you can use to create a pattern. So we're going to do a really basic pattern. I'm going to select my heart tool again, and I'm just going to create a heart shape right in the middle of my artboard here. And I want to make sure it's dead center, it's not touching any of my edges. I'm going to increase the size just a bit. And no, you don't have to only make your patterns in a square. You can create it in a rectangle. And what the Affine function does is basically take whatever in the center of your artboard and pulls it to the corners. So what I would suggest we do first though is copy that heart so that we have an extra one, and then I'm going to turn that heart off in my layers by uncheck marking it, and then I'm going to select the heart that is turned on. You'll know it's on because there's a check mark, and that's the one I'm going to be working with. So what I'm going to do is go up to filters and I'm going to select distort, and then I'm going to go into the distort option. There's another drop down and I'm going to select Affine. And basically, like what I said, Affine does is it drags whatever's in the center to your corners. And so what we want to do is update this little pop-up that comes here. So we want to keep our scale for X and Y the same. What we're going to change is the offset. So we're going to offset our X by 50%, and then we're going to offset our Y by 50%. And you see already that it's pulling that shape into the sides. And then when we do the Y, and making sure our extend mode is wrap, after we enter 50% for our Y and hit apply, you'll see all of our corners are now filled. So then we can go back into that original heart, turn it on, we can resize it, and then we've made a seamless pattern. To export this and test it out, I'm going to turn off my rectangle color here just so that it's a transparent background. And I'm going to select File, and I'm going to go down to Export. I'm going to export it as a PNG, and I'm going to export my whole document, and then hit Export. I'm going to save it as my heart pattern, and then I'm going to save it in the file that I have set up for it, hit Save. And then what we are going to do is test this out. So I'm just going to turn off these elements in this file here, and I'm going to turn back on my rectangle. And then I'm going to go to my shape tool and select the rectangle tool. And I'm going to create a new rectangle that goes across my artboard here. I know it's the same color as the heart. We're going to change that really quickly. And I'm going to change it to like a really light pink, I think, just so that it'll be easy to see the heart itself. And then we want to go to the left-hand side, and we're going to select the gradient tool. And what you'll see is at the very top left-hand corner, you're going to have two options pop up: your context and your type. So for your context, what you want to make sure it is fill. And then for our type, we're going to change it from solid, and we're going to scroll all the way down to bitmap. And basically, bitmap allows you to fill a shape with an image. So in this case, it's going to be a heart pattern that we've created, and I'm going to select that and then hit open. And it's going to look just like what we had it as before, but if we take these arms and pull it in, you'll see that we've created a seamless pattern. And the next thing I want to do is showcase how you can utilize traditional art and clean it up in Affinity Photo really, really quickly. So, like I said, I like to create surface pattern designs. One way I like to do this is not just digitally, but utilizing traditional artwork. So I'm going to open up a file that is watercolor. So I've scanned some images in of some like really quick watercolor elements that I created recently. And what I'm going to do is just select one, hit open, and then it's going to open it up in Affinity Photo for me. I'm going to rotate it by just rotating, using my mouse to rotate around, or you can go into document and you can rotate your canvas clockwise or counterclockwise, things like that. So what I want to do is I'm going to unlock this layer. I'm going to click on that layer in my layers panel. I'm going to click that little lock so that I can unlock it. And I'm going to utilize my filters to remove this paper background. So as you can see, I scanned it in. You can see the paper background here. There's a lot of texture there. And what we want to do is basically remove all this white so that all that's left is the color portion of the artwork, which is the flowers. The easiest way to do this is to go into colors and then going down to erase white paper. But before we do that, what we like to do is kind of prepare the artwork really quickly in order to have as much contrast as possible. So what we'll do is we'll go into our adjustment studio here, and what we'll want to do is adjust our levels as well as our brightness and contrast. So you're going to select levels, and you'll see this little pop-up. Just select your default, and then you'll be able to adjust using the meters here. So you'll pull right to increase the darkness of your color, and then you'll pull left to make your white whiter. You don't want it so much so that the color disappears, like the lighter colors. So I just adjust it just a bit, and then I'm going to go into my brightness and contrast by clicking on it and then selecting default, and again adjusting my brightness so that there's a large contrast between the color and the paper. Once I've done that, this kind of helps to remove any texture in the paper and the white part, but still keep the texture and the color. So that it's easy to ensure that that filter completely erases the white background. So once I'm done with that, I can just hit X, and then what we'll want to do is go into our layers, and what you'll see is that 2 additional layers have been created to make those adjustments. What we'll want to do is you can copy your original just in case if you'd like to by just clicking on it, and then by just right clicking it and then selecting duplicate and then just turning it off, and then selecting that original layer as well as those additional layers with the adjustments. And you'll want to select all of them by clicking on your first one, holding shift on your keyboard, and then selecting the last one, and it'll select all of the layers in that grouping. And then we'll want to right click and we'll want to merge visible. And this basically merges and flattens all of those layers, and it creates a new layer, so you can just turn off those other layers and then click on the new pixel layer that's been created. And then we'll go into our filters and we'll go down to colors, and then we'll select erase white paper, and it will erase your white paper. You might notice though that there's still a little bit of like the shadow. What you can do is just go into your tools over here and select the erase brush tool. And I'm just gonna resize this because right now mine is really huge for some reason. And then I'm just gonna erase anything that isn't necessary on my screen. Like I have some like splashes of color here that I don't want, some random spots, but overall it completely erased that background without leaving any random like texture or anything except for these little bits on the edge. So I'll just go in and clean that up, and it's left me with a nice transparent image that I can utilize on different files, but it still has that really pretty texture I can turn into patterns. The next tip that I want to highlight is utilizing adjustments for photo editing. So I'm going to open up an image, just a basic fashion image, and we're going to play around with some of these adjustments so you can see how you can utilize Affinity Photo to do what it's meant to do, which is basically edit photos. I use it for both design work as well as art and kind of like illustration rendering, but the forte of what the software is for is editing photos. So I'm going to select File, Open, and I'm going to go into my downloads and I'm going to open this image that I have. And this is obviously a professional image, so it's beautiful as is. You don't really have to do anything, but I'm just going to show you some options of what you can do. You can change colors, you can add adjustments. So similar to what we did with the watercolor painting that I have, you can adjust your levels, your brightness, your white balance, things like that. So I'm going to select my adjustment tool. You can adjust your black levels, your white. You can go in and adjust your white balance, which is really great. Some cameras tend to be very warm and perhaps you want more of a cool color, so you might want to adjust your white balance over to the blue to kind of offset that yellow. You can adjust your tint as well. You can also recolor your image based on different hues, things like that. You can adjust the lightness and the darkness here. And what's nice is that, say you don't want your image to be kind of like a sepia or black and white like what we just did, we can go into our layers and you'll see that it's not editing the original, it's adding layers with these adjustments on top. So I can just delete that layer and it'll be gone and you'll be back to where you were before. You can also clean up skin tone. Not that this girl needs anything cleaned up, but say we wanted to soften her pores a bit and like remove some of this texture, we can utilize frequency separation. So the first thing that we'll want to do for this is go back into our layers here. I'm just going to make a copy of this original layer by right-clicking it and selecting duplicate. And then I'm going to uncheck the locked mark or uncheck the locked layer so I don't do anything to it, and then go to the new duplicated layer. So in order to utilize the frequency separation, we're going to select that layer we're going to be working on. Then we're going to go to filter and we're going to select frequency separation. And what we'll want to do is within the dialog box, we'll want to just choose a radius that only just blurs the texture in the face and leaves kind of like a really gentle transition between the skin tones. So like on the left hand side right now, you see it's very, very blurry. So we'll just want to bring down that blur just a bit. If we take it all the way away, you'll see it's very textured, but if we bring it up just a bit, it will help to kind of blur out the skin. And it's just barely blurred out the skin just a bit. We'll say we wanted to remove these moles. Let's resize our brush down so that it's smaller. And what we need to do is select an area from the skin that we want to basically heal this to match. So we're gonna select our option. I'm on a Mac, so I'm gonna select option to select the color or the area that I'm basically utilizing to match. And then I'm just going to paint over that key area using the healing brush tool. And it's going to basically remove that color and match it with the area around it. Now I'm going to go back into my original file here, and I'm going to show you a few more things that relate to like text. So on the left hand side, you'll notice towards the bottom there is the letter A. That is your artistic text tool. If you see T, that is your frame text tool. These will be the tools that you use to add text to your artwork in Affinity Photo or whatever it is that you're creating in the software. So if we select the artistic text tool, it gives you just like you start with just the basic letter, and you can just add type to your document. Now, if you're utilizing the text frame tool, what this does is basically allows you to create a frame, and then your text will have to fit within the limitations of that frame. So I'm going to click inside of it, and then in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see you have the options to change your text and your type to different fonts and different sizes. Where it says 12 point, there's a drop down. You can increase the size as well. You will see that when you add your type to the frame, it won't go beyond the frame limitations. What's nice is that you could also utilize type and shapes together. And I'm going to add some shapes to the screen here. So I'm going to add a couple of rectangles. And if you notice you don't have any color in your rectangle, just go to your color studio, update your color so that you have a fill. And say I wanted this square to be right in the middle of the add type like word set. You can utilize your magnetics tools, and you'll see like a green and red line pop up. I have those turned on in my upper menu here. It looks like a little magnet. Or you can utilize your alignment tool. So right here in the center of my screen, there are alignment tools, but you can also go to arrange, and you can utilize the align tools here as well. If we wanted to select this square and the type, I'm just going to use my black arrow tool, select both of them by dragging over them. And then you'll see my alignment tools pop up here towards the left, and also over here towards the right, you have the options too. So you can align horizontally in the center, and it'll align it there. You can align horizontally to the left. You can align it vertically. You can also utilize your align tools in your arrange menu. So you'll select arrange, and what you can do is align to the middle. Or you can use these align options down here as well and just align towards the center, left, right. It just makes lining things up really simple and easy, which is great for layout skills when you're working with things like poster design and things like that. What's nice too is with Affinity, with Affinity Photo, when you're working with type, you could check your type as well by clicking on that type with your black arrow tool, selecting text, and then scrolling down to spelling, and then you can check spelling. I have check spelling while typing clicked because it'll underline anything that is misspelled. So this is just a really great way to do a really simple spell check as you're working on any projects that may need type. And then what's really cool too with this is that you could type along specific paths. So say you wanted to create type along a curve. What you can do is select your curve shape. So I'm going to select the ellipse tool, the circle tool here. I'm going to create a circle. I'm going to make sure it has no fill and no stroke by going into my color and removing my fill by hitting that little circle with the red line through it and making sure I have no fill for my, and I have no color for my stroke as well. And then I'm going to go and select my artistic text tool. And then I'm going to basically click where that circle is. And I'm just going to adjust my text size so that it's easier to see. And you can type on a curve. And you can adjust this curve by selecting your black arrow tool. And then when and you can adjust this curve by selecting the little red and green arrows inside of your shape. And then you could also rotate it using the little arm here. You can also make it so that the curve is inside of the shape versus outside of the shape. And now my final tip that I want to highlight is that when you're saving a file in Affinity Photo, you can choose to save your history states as well by selecting Save History File with Document. And basically this saves all of your undos and everything that you've worked through. So you're basically starting exactly where you left off. And you can just hit yes. If you don't want that, obviously just save as, and then it'll save it with your entire history. But of course, if you don't want that, you can just hit File, Save As, and save it as a regular Affinity file. The last kind of like bonus tip when it comes to saving is what's nice is that even though you're working in an Affinity product, you can save this as a PSD file and open it in a program like Adobe. So you'll want to select File and then Export, and then you'll save it as a PSD file. You can also save it as an EPS file if you want to open it in a vector program. But PSD will allow you to preserve your accuracy, and you'll just hit Export, and then you'll be able to save it wherever you need to, and you'll be able to open it up in an Adobe product. Okay, so that is it for my tips. I hope you found them helpful. I hope you found this rundown of my top Affinity Photo tips helpful. If you have any tips that I didn't include, let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for stopping by today, and if you're not already, make sure you subscribe to my channel so you can stay up to date on my latest tutorials, course launches, and of course, vlogs. If you're looking for other ways to connect with me, you can visit me online at www.bellasophiacreative.com. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!